16 years ago, 3 future kings made a promise to a girl in the woods. They lost everything that same night. Today, they've come back for her. But she has no idea who they've become.
When we become the Alpha Kings, we will come back and marry you.
Her bread was still in the small cloth bundle she had tied to her wrist that morning. 2 thick slices her grandmother had wrapped in a square of linen with a small piece of hard cheese and an instruction to be home before the light changes. She had eaten the cheese already. The bread she was saving because Aurora had understood from a young age that it was always better to save something for later, because later had a way of needing things you did not expect. She heard them before she saw them. Not voices, not movement. So something more subtle than either. A shift in the texture of the silence, a change in the quality of the air, the way the forest seemed to pull its breath in and hold it. Aurora stopped walking. She stood very still between 2 enormous roots and looked toward the sound that wasn't quite a sound. She almost did not see them. They were very still, pressed together against the bark, half in shadow. But one of them moved, the smallest shift, a hand reaching to brace against the ground, and a bar of amber light fell directly across his face, and Aurora saw him clearly for one suspended, unbelievable moment. He was perhaps her age, perhaps a little older. Light brown skin and sharp-featured, with a face that would have been beautiful if it were not so tight with pain. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. Beneath the tear, something dark and slow was moving down his arm. He was bleeding. She looked at the second boy, also bleeding, a gash across his brow that had dried to a dark crust above one eye. She looked at the third and tallest boy, who was already looking directly at her. His eyes were gold, not brown, not amber. Gold, the color of afternoon light through glass, ringed with something darker. And in that moment, Aurora was certain she had never seen eyes like that on a person before, because they did not look like a child's eyes at all. They looked like something that had seen considerably more of the world than the face around them suggested. They were identical. The tall boy did not speak. He did not move. He simply watched her with those impossible eyes, and Aurora had the peculiar feeling that he was deciding something. She was deciding something too. Any other child might have run. Aurora considered it, she will admit that later, to no one, for approximately 3 seconds. The fear unfolded itself slightly from behind her ribs and pointed out, quite reasonably, that there were 3 of them and 1 of her, and that they were bleeding and strange and their eyes were the wrong color, and that grandmother said be home before the light changes, and the light was very much in the process of changing, and none of this was what was supposed to happen on a Tuesday afternoon in the last week of summer. Aurora listened to all of this. Then she folded the fear back up again, tucked it away, and walked toward them. "You're hurt," she said. Not a question. Not an accusation. Simply the thing that was true, offered plainly, and the way her grandmother had taught her to offer true things. "We're fine," the tall boy said. His voice was low and carefully controlled in a way that reminded Aurora of her grandmother's voice when something was very wrong and the old woman did not want anyone to know. She had learned to recognize that particular kind of careful. "You're not fine," Aurora said. She set her bundle down on the root beside her and began unwrapping it. "Your arm is bleeding. His head is bleeding. And he—" She looked at the boy on the right, who had gone very pale and was sitting with one leg stretched out at an angle that looked uncomfortable. "He's been holding that position so long I think he can't move it without it hurting." The tall boy said nothing. "I'm Aurora," she said, because it seemed important to say it. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm lost, actually, so I can't even leave properly if I wanted to." Something shifted in the tall boy's face. It was not quite a smile, but it was something in that direction, something reluctant and surprised at itself. The boy with the wound above his eye made a sound that was almost a laugh. He had a lighter quality to him than the other 2, something that wanted to be warm even through the pain and the wariness. "You're lost," he said, "and we're the ones you're worried about." "You're bleeding," Aurora said again, as if this settled the argument. "I have bread and I have linen and I can tear the linen into bandages. I don't have anything for the bleeding to stop faster, but my grandmother says firm pressure and patience does what medicine does, only slower." She held up the bread as evidence. The pale boy looked at it. His eyes, she noticed, were the same gold as the tall boy's. All three of them had those eyes, she realized, golden and watchful and wrong in the best way she could not explain. She worked in the way her grandmother had taught her. She unwrapped the bread, folded it back in its half so it would stay as clean as possible, and used the linen to make 3 rough strips, tearing along the weave the way she had seen the old woman do with fever cloths. The boy with the hurt leg, the pale one, the quiet one, watched her hands the entire time she wrapped the strips around the gash she found when she carefully, slowly, rolled up the leg of his trousers and asked his permission first. He did not speak, but his golden eyes were very attentive, and there was something in them that she would not find a word for until she was much older, gratitude so large it had nowhere to go. The boy with the cut on his brow submitted to having it cleaned with the dampened corner of her dress, him with only a slight wince and an expression of profound dignity that made her want to smile. "What's your name?" she asked him. He glanced at the tall boy. The tall boy said nothing. "Bale," the boy said, as if offering half of something. "You can call me Bale." She looked at the quiet one with the leg. He looked back at her. "Caden," he said, just the one word, but he said it like he was trusting her with something. She looked at the tall boy last. He had been watching her work from the beginning, not with suspicion anymore, but with something quieter and more complicated, the way you watch something you did not know you needed until it was right in front of you. "Jorah," he said. And then, after a pause, "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Aurora said, and handed him the bread. The 4 of them sat together in the hollow of the 3 grown-together trees, as the light in the woods shifted from gold to a deeper, more serious amber. Aurora ate nothing. She had given the bread in 3 portions, slightly unequal, because she had given the largest piece to the one with the hurt leg without thinking, because he was the most pale, and she did not want any of it back. They were hungry in a way that told her they had not eaten in some time, not frantic but thorough, careful, like people who had learned not to waste what was given. She did not ask them where they came from. She had the sense that the answer was not one they could give her, and she respected closed doors. She asked them instead whether they liked the woods, whether they had seen the part near the eastern edge where the trees grew in a perfect circle and the ground inside the circle was always dry no matter the weather, whether they had ever tried to catch fireflies in cupped hands and look at the light through the crack between your fingers. Bale answered all of these with surprising enthusiasm. Caden listened with his head tilted slightly, the way people listen when something is reaching them in a place they did not expect. Jorah sat with his arms across his knees and watched her talk and said very little, but his expression did something slow and continuous throughout, like a stone wall in which someone is very carefully, very quietly, removing one brick at a time. The light continued to change, and then Jorah looked up at the sky through the branches, and something in his face changed too, something decided. "We'll walk you home," he said. Aurora looked at him. "You don't know where I live." "You said you were lost." "That means you came from somewhere. We'll find it." "Your leg," she said to Caden. "Is fine," Caden said. He stood, slowly, carefully, and put weight on it, and his face did something complicated, but he stayed upright. "I can walk." Bale was already on his feet, brushing bark from his sleeves with the air of someone who had simply been taking a brief rest in the woods and was now ready to continue his day. Aurora looked at the 3 of them. She said, "Okay, thank you." They moved through the darkening woods in a silence that was nothing like the silence she had walked through alone. That silence had been empty and directional, always pointing toward the absence of home. She never asked how Jorah knew which direction to walk. He simply knew, and the trees agreed with him, and within 20 minutes the darkness between the trunks ahead of them took on a warmer color. Cottage light, her grandmother's window. Aurora's chest loosened with relief so strong it felt like being set down after a long time being carried, and then she stopped walking, because the boys had stopped. They stood at the tree line, exactly where the woods ended and the back garden of the cottage began, and they would go no further. She understood this without being told. Whatever they were hiding from, they could not step out of the trees and into the ordinary light of that ordinary window. She turned to face them. Bale looked at her with that private warmth she still could not quite name. "Safe home, Aurora," he said. Caden reached out and took her hand. He held it for a moment, just a moment, small fingers around smaller fingers, and then let go. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Jorah looked at her last. He looked at her for a long time, with those ancient in a child's face golden eyes, and when he spoke his voice was quiet and absolutely serious, in a way that made the whole forest go still around them. "When we become the Alpha Kings," he said, "we will come back and marry you." Aurora blinked. Then she laughed. It was a real laugh, bright and uncomplicated and entirely delighted, because it was the sweetest, strangest, most wonderful game she had ever heard, and she was 8 years old. "Okay," she said, in the way one agrees to the best part of a game. She waved at them the way you wave at friends at the end of a very good afternoon. Then she turned and skipped across the dark garden toward her grandmother's light, her empty breadcloth swinging at her wrist, already composing in her mind the version of the afternoon she would tell when the door opened. She did not look back. If she had looked back, she would have seen 3 boys standing motionless at the edge of the trees. She would have seen that none of them moved until the cottage door had opened and swallowed her inside, and the light behind the window had shifted to show the shadow of a small figure and a tall old woman folding together in the warmth. The cottage door opened before Aurora's hand reached the handle. Her grandmother stood in the doorway with the lamp held high and her face doing the particular thing it did when she had been frightened for long enough that the fright had curdled into something sharper. Her green eyes too bright, mouth pressed into a thin line that was trying very hard to be anger instead of relief. "I'm here, Gran," she said. "I'm fine," stepped forward, and pulled Aurora against her chest so firmly that Aurora felt the old woman's heartbeat, fast, still fast, not yet settled. "You're cold," her grandmother said into her hair. "Only a little." "You're late." "I know. I told you before the light changes." "I know, Gran." She took Aurora by the hand and brought her inside, to the kitchen, where the fire was burning with the particular urgency of a fire that had been fed by someone with nervous hands, and set her in the chair closest to the warmth. "Sit," she said. Aurora sat. Her grandmother brought warm milk, was glad Aurora was home, that she was not yet fully recovered from the gladness, and that she expected an explanation. Aurora told her the truth, almost all of it. Her grandmother listened to all of this with her elbows on the table and her winter water eyes steady and unblinking. "You were not frightened?" she asked when Aurora had finished. "I was," Aurora said honestly, "but not so much that I couldn't keep walking." Her grandmother looked at her for a moment. "That," she said quietly, "is the most important thing." She reached across the table and patted Aurora's hand once, twice, with a palm that was dry and warm and familiar as anything in the world. She did not mention the boys, not the 3 of them huddled in the hollow of the grown-together trees, not the blood on Jorah's hands or the gash above Bale's eye, or the careful way Caden had held himself still so she would not see how badly the leg was hurting, not the bread torn into 3 portions, not the linen strips from the hem that her grandmother had already noticed and had, not the promise. She said nothing about any of it. She tucked them away, all 3 of them, She only knew she was not ready to say their names out loud yet. She was not sure the world deserved them. The old woman looked at her with those eyes that missed nothing. Aurora looked back with the clear, steady gaze of a child who has decided on a story and is committed to it with her whole heart. Her grandmother, who had been young once and understood the architecture of necessary silences, let it go. That night, in the narrow bed beneath the window where the curtain moved in the late summer breeze, Aurora lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and thought about golden eyes. Not all at once, one at a time. She thought about the promise. "When we become the Alpha Kings, we will come back and marry you." She smiled at the ceiling in the dark. It was the sweetest game, the most elaborate, serious-faced, wonderful game. 3 strange boys in the woods with their golden eyes and their proud mouths, playing at kings as if they already knew what kings felt like from the inside. She wondered where they were now, whether they had somewhere safe to sleep, whether Caden's leg had been properly looked after, whether Jorah ever smiled with his whole face or only ever with his eyes. She wondered if she would see them again. Probably not, she thought. Probably they lived very far from here, and this would become one of those stories she kept only for herself. She closed her eyes. She was asleep within minutes, easy and dreamless. The way children sleep after days that have been much larger than expected. Meanwhile, the boys met something different at home. They smelled it before they saw it. Jorah stopped walking first. He stopped so suddenly, then Bael stilled too, and his face, which had been carrying something lighter all the way back from the human woods, something quiet and lifted in the corners of it that had not been there before a girl with bread and no fear had sat down beside them, went very, very still. Caden came up between them on the right. He looked at the horizon. The sky above their realm was burning. You must understand what it means to be a wolf prince and see your home on fire. But first you must understand what it means to be a triplet wolf prince, because this is not the same as any ordinary loss. In the wolf world, identical triplets born to a royal bloodline were not simply unusual, they were mythic. They felt things together when the feeling was large enough, not always, not the small daily things. But the things that mattered, the ones that hit hard enough to send a tremor through the bond between them, those arrived in all 3 simultaneously, slightly differently shaped, colored by each one's particular nature, but arriving together, which is why, when the Alpha King, their father, sole ruler of the realm of Ethon, the greatest wolf kingdom in the known world, drew his last breath on the other side of that burning horizon, all 3 of them felt it at exactly the same instant. It did not arrive like grief. Not yet. It arrived like an amputation. Immediate. Total. The severing of something that had been so constant it had been invisible. The way the ground under your feet is invisible until it is suddenly gone and you are falling. Jorah made no sound. Bael's breath went out once, hard, and did not come back for a long moment. Caden closed his eyes. 1 second, 2. Then Jorah moved, and the other 2 moved with him, and they ran. They had been born running together. They ran through the dark forest toward the orange sky, and none of them spoke because there was nothing to say that the running was not already saying. The realm of Ethon, ancient and immense, carved into the mountain valley that the wolf bloodlines had held for 1,000 years, was burning in the specific, targeted way that told you immediately this was not accident or misfortune. This was precision. This was intent. The gates had not been broken. They had been removed, lifted from their great hinges with a force that left the stone itself cracked at the anchor points. The main hall stood. The east wing was gone. The towers, 3 of them, one for each prince by long tradition, had their upper levels sheared away as if something enormous had simply decided the height was offensive. In the courtyard, the survivors were gathered, the generals, the elder council, the palace household who had made it through. They stood in the way of people who have survived something that should not have been survivable and are not yet certain what to do with that fact. When the three princes came through the broken gate, the crowd parted. Old Vasrik, the general who had served their father for 30 years and had the kind of face that had been weathered by everything and broken by nothing, was kneeling in the center of the courtyard. He looked up when they arrived. "Your father is gone," he said. His voice was steady with the particular steadiness of a man who has been rehearsing this sentence for hours and has finally been given someone to say it to. "Your mother with him. The attack came at first light. We held as long as we could." The three of them stood before him. The silence that followed was absolute, not empty, but full. "How many?" Jorah said. Vasrik told him. "Who?" Jorah said. Vasrik told him that too. And then the old general said the sentence that changed the particular quality of the silence entirely. "They waited until you left, my lords. The attack was timed. They knew you were gone." The three of them absorbed this. Timed, meaning planned around their specific absence, meaning someone had watched and waited for the window, the one morning in months when the three heirs to Ethan had left together, and had moved the instant it opened. Jorah's jaw tightened. Bael looked at the broken towers. His face had the particular stillness of a fire banked very low, all the heat contained, none of it showing. Caden said nothing, but Caden's silence had a density to it that people who knew him had learned to read the way others read expressions. This silence said, "Noted, filed, to be addressed in full at the time of my choosing." "We rebuild," Jorah said. His voice was quiet, not shaking, not performing steadiness either. Genuinely steady, in the way of something that has found the ground beneath it and is standing on it with its full weight. "We rebuild," he said again. "We begin tonight." They were crowned at dawn, not because it was the ideal time, no time would have been ideal in the ash of that particular morning, but because an empty throne was a message their enemies were counting on, and they refused to send it. The Elder Council gathered in the great hall with its broken ceiling open to the gray morning sky. The surviving household stood witness. The generals stood at the walls. The crown of Ethan, heavier than it looked, as crowns always are, as if they accumulate the weight of every head that has worn them before, was brought out on its ceremonial cloth. There was, of course, only one crown. There had always been only one crown, because there had never before been three heirs. The wolf laws were clear and ancient. In the event of triplet heirs of the Alpha bloodline, the throne was not divided. It could not be divided, not because the law forbade it, but because the nature of triplet Alpha heirs made division impossible. One crown, one kingdom, one throne to share. This had been written into the old texts too, in the same careful hand that had recorded the rarity of their birth. Where three heirs share one blood and one bond, so too shall they share one crown, and one mate. For what is singular in them cannot be divided without the division of themselves. The eldest elder placed the crown on Jorah's head first, not because Jorah ruled the others, but because he had been born first and tradition required an order for what nature had made simultaneous. Then Jorah passed it to Bael, then Bael to Caden. Each of them wore it for a moment. Then it was placed in the center of the dais, between the three thrones that the craftsmen had been quietly building since the triplets were born, because the realm had always known this day would come, and the elder spoke the words of the Ethan coronation over all three of them together. The hall was very quiet. The three of them stood beneath their shared crown in the gray light of a very difficult morning and received it. They were too young. So they knew it. Every face in the hall knew it. But they stood straight under the weight of it. They stood with their shoulders level and their golden eyes steady. Three faces that were the same face wearing three different expressions of the same thing. We are here. We are not broken. We will not be broken. The years that followed were not kind years. They were necessary ones. There is a difference. Together, always together. Because the triplet bond was not only emotional, it was strategic. They had grown up training as a unit, learning to fight in the specific coordination of three bodies that shared a single instinct for movement. In the years after the coronation, they refined this until it was not a skill but an extension of themselves. They also governed. And Jorah led the councils. His gravity and his precision made for him the kind of authority that rooms fell quiet for without being asked. He could read a political situation the way a physician reads a wound, immediately, completely, with an understanding of exactly what it would cost to fix it. Bael rebuilt the alliances, riding to neighboring territories with his father's broken seal and returning with new agreements that were stronger for being made in difficulty. He understood people. Not as pieces to be moved, but as creatures of feeling who made decisions based on what they needed to believe about themselves, and who responded to someone who saw this clearly and did not exploit it. Caden managed the realm itself, the land, the people, the long and patient work of rebuilding what the attack had destroyed. He was everywhere and quiet about it. Walls went up, harvests recovered, families that had been scattered returned to find their streets repaired and their livelihoods restored, and when they asked who had arranged it, the answer was always the same: the youngest king. He was here before dawn. The world watched. The world revised its understanding of what the three young kings were. But there were the private moments. The world did not see these. Jorah, in the late evenings after the councils had dispersed and the great hall had emptied, would sit alone at the long table with one candle. He would sit and do nothing, not plan, not strategize, not read. Just sit in the specific quality of silence that existed after the day's noise had finally stopped. And sometimes in that silence, his eyes would go somewhere else entirely, not to the stone walls of Ethan, somewhere further, somewhere that smelled of old trees and late summer, and a child's voice saying you're hurt with the matter-of-fact tenderness of someone for whom kindness was simply the obvious next step. In those moments, something in Jorah's face did what it did nowhere else. It softened, only in that silence, only in that particular direction. Then the candle would gutter, or a guard's footsteps would sound in the corridor outside, and he would return. The softness would go back wherever it lived, and he would stand, and he would be the king again by morning. Bael's private moments arrived differently, as laughter. Genuine, unguarded laughter that surprised even him. In the middle of an ordinary day, some small thing would catch him entirely off guard. A child's joke carried on the wind through an open window, the particular smell of bread warming on a fire, the first snow of the season arriving an hour earlier than expected, and he would laugh, briefly and completely, and then look faintly surprised at himself, as if checking where it had come from. It always came from the same place. He knew exactly where it came from. He kept that knowledge warm and did not examine it more than he needed to. And Caden had a habit. His attendants had noticed it long ago and had learned quietly not to comment on it. In the evenings, or sometimes in the deep hours before dawn, when sleep required more patience than he had available, he would be found on the south-facing parapet of Ethan's rebuilt wall, just standing, just looking out over the dark tree line and the pale roads and the long distance toward the border between his world and the human one. He never explained it. He did not need to explain it. She was south. South, he would think. Standing in the dark with the cold wind moving through the rebuilt battlements of his father's kingdom. In 16 years, the three of them spoke of her directly perhaps a handful of times. Bael said without preamble, "We are going back for her when this is done," and the other two said nothing at all, but the silence between them was the clearest. A most complete yes that silence can contain. That was the time a neighboring lord sent his daughter to Ethan with a proposal letter written in gold ink and a great deal of political optimism. Jorah declined with a brevity that left the messenger bewildered and the elder council exchanging glances. Across the council table, Caden caught Jorah's eye for half a second. They both looked away. Nothing was said. Everything was understood. Caden and Bale were alone in the South Tower room, fire burning, conversation gone easy and quiet between them. Caden looked at the fire for a long time. Then he said, "Do you think she still lives in the same village?" Bale was quiet. Then he said, "I think wherever she is, she still gives her bread to people who haven't asked for it." Caden was quiet for a long while after that. The fire spoke for both of them. "Yes," Caden said at last, "I think so too." This was the truth of what she had given them. Without knowing, she had become part of their fabrics. They had been princes fleeing a burning kingdom, wounded and alone, and running from enemies who had chosen their moment with cold precision. She had been 8 years old with half a loaf of bread and no fear she couldn't manage. And she had fed them. She had no idea what she had done. She did not know she was their reason for surviving. 16 years after a small girl had waved goodbye at a tree line and skipped home to her grandmother's light, the 3 kings of Ethon left their realm. No announcement, no ceremony, only a quietly ordered black carriage, enormous and dark as the space between stars. Drawn by horses that moved like something more than horses, 3 men, one direction, south, toward a human village, toward a woman who did not know they were coming.